works. Some familiar faces, some unfamiliar faces. Hi, my name is Katia. I got quite upset about some types of toxic flow that I've seen in the last few weeks, experienced in DeFi, and spoke about it in Berlin 2 weeks ago. So this is a repeat of that because it sounds like it resonated with some people. My name is Katia. I run Bebop, which is an on-chain RFQ system. Anyone here does not know how on-chain RFQ works? Great, everyone does. That's good, which means I will skip those slides. So I'm going to talk about toxic flow specifically within the context of RFQ. And I'm going to also talk about it in the context of the concept of lemon and peach market, which is a fairly old paper by an economist who spoke about information asymmetry and its impact on the markets, and I'll basically bring it back to DeFi. So let's look. So I'm going to talk about toxic versus soft flow, types of toxic flow in RFQ, or please don't try this at home type situation. Acker loves peaches and lemons, and how it impacts DeFi and what we could do about it. So, broad brush flow classification from kind of my perspective. Dumb versus informed, soft versus toxic. I really don't like the dumb versus informed type kind of lingo because there's a lot of informed flow that's not toxic. It can be directional trades, it can be some sort of alpha or whatever that is, but it does not necessarily mean toxic in the context of what I'm talking about. And so basically, when I spoke about like soft, I think I also say sometimes PvE, or in the lingo of Akarov, that's peaches, and then toxic, also PvP, and we say a lot of that in DeFi, or as Akarov was referring to something like that as market for lemons. Right. So type of toxic flow, generally, so I asked ChatGPT what toxic flow means, and it said it refers to trading activity that is adverse to the counterparty providing liquidity, which is true. I mean, from that respect, I kind of feel like most of pools are toxic flow by definition. I don't know why so many people still LP into pools. But really, I'm not going to talk about anything kind of like MEV kind of stuff. So I'm going to talk about like what I refer to like non-MEV toxic flow within RFQ specifically. And so basically, some examples I'm going to share is going to be same venue atomic orb, multi-venue atomic orb, and slicing. So ultimately, these are the types of activities that are adverse, that create adverse effects on RFQ liquidity providers, and basically that's market makers. I still call them market makers and not solvers, because I think that lingo is a little bit confused these days. But I mean, yeah, ultimately, I'm going to talk about that. So I'm going to skip. How RFQ works, although maybe I can just stay here. So the key thing that happens in RFQ is that when the user asks for a quote, one maker or multiple makers provide the quote, and that quote lives for a period of time. And that is when you take the risk, because if you're on mainnet and the user needs to click through the wallet and this and this and that, 60 seconds has passed, then it takes like 12 seconds to land the transaction on chain. It is a lot of time. It is a lot of time to take the price risk. And when it gets worse is when there are, bad actors or like, annoying actors who basically, instead of doing something smart on chain, are starting doing things like this. So, for example, same venue atomic orb, very easy strategy. You come in at T0, you get one price on the RFQ. In 15 seconds, let's say, you take another price. And your T0 plus time to live is longer than this usually. It's longer on L2s, it's longer on L1s. So a classic atomic arbor would like bring those two quotes, put them in the same transaction, and as long as the gas cost justifies it, they made a profit. Kind of like in a really dumb and annoying way. Another example is when it happens to like multi-venue. So for example, one transaction goes through RFQ, the other transaction goes through another venue. It could be a centralized exchange, it can be just another venue on the same chain, a different chain. And so that's also is referred to as sitting on quotes. And that means that basically, let's say you get one price, you get you wait for the price to change. If it changes significantly, you execute like at a better price on another venue, and you execute at the price that you got 40 seconds ago on an RFQ, because the maker guarantees the execution, right? So it's kind of, so I mean, this happens all the time, normal arbitrage, like this is how kind of arbitrage works. The difference, of course, here is that you deliberately wait for a period of time, and ultimately the market moves against the maker, and it moves in your favor. But I mean, ultimately, you kind of didn't really create anything beneficial for the market, because the market moved without you. Another example is slicing. So slicing is something that we see very often. Every algo, like solver algo, aggregator algo, has done it at least once, because it sort of kind of makes sense, but then you sort of realize what's happening. Basically, let's say you have a 1 million trade that you want to put, and it has a spread. Obviously, you can say, hey, instead of doing 1 million, I'm going to put 10 100K quotes, put them in the one transaction, and I'm going to pay this much spread. Not this much spread. Now that exceeds the cost of hedging for a maker. Obviously, again, they get kind of wrecked on this trade, again, you made profit, but what next, right? So, and I mean, like, ultimately, why do we care? Because makers make money. So, what if this happens to them? Well, what if I'm gonna get back to the peaches and lemons? So, for those of you who don't necessarily remember the paper, it's from, I think, 1972 or 74, something like that. It's quite old. And it was really about asymmetric information, and specifically determining the economic costs of dishonesty. So basically, the context specifically was, as an example, was taken as a used car market. So you have peaches, good cars, and lemons, bad cars that sellers offer. Now, what happens, the buyers come in and they price this risk in, so they're kind of happy to pay sort of an average price, not knowing whether the car is good or bad. But as a result, what happens, it pushes the peaches out of the market while the lemons remain, because the good car sellers are not happy to sell at that price. That's sort of like average expectation price, but the lemon ones are happy to do so. So what happens is that, as a result, the market quality deteriorates dramatically, because basically the peaches kind of are not there anymore, but the lemons are. So, like, really classic paper, lots of different reinterpretations. So here's your DeFi reinterpretation of that. So basically, in our case, the quality of flow can be the peach or the lemon, and so soft flow is peach, toxic flow is lemon. So really, the market makers respond in two ways to getting robbed in this way. One, they widen a lot, and two, they stop quoting, right? They maybe stop quoting to this particular address or something like that, or they can just like completely stop quoting. And so as a result, kind of what does it mean? First of all, we decrease the quality of on-chain execution, and that is especially evident in larger sizes and in kind of, let's say, DeFi blue chip type kind of altcoins, I would say. So we also kind of remove the ability for users who require guaranteed price and guaranteed execution to have access to that, right? Because that's what makers provide, and no on-chain routing like AMM pool can provide that. And also actually removing competition, or kind of like closing the doors to new competition in, because it becomes just like too expensive or too kind of becomes too much of a hassle to do that. So new makers don't actually enter those kind of markets, and that's why, for example, we see in sort of on-chain RFQ that some of the largest makers in crypto don't necessarily participate in a lot of on-chain activity or a lot of, for example, on-chain RFQ, even if they're very active in off-chain OTC. Why is that? And that's partially to blame. You need to know how to manage those things. Just kind of as illustration of, what does DeFi peach market look like? It looks pretty good. It's either as well or better priced than actually a lot of spot CeFi venues, especially if you add those like exchange fees, whether it's Binance or whatnot. And actually, if you look at price impact metrics such as 2% impact depth, there's also like really good favorable comparison. So I have a couple of examples here. So this is Bebop consolidated book on the left and some CoinGecko stats for CeFi venues on the right. So, looking at plus minus 2% depth, I'm looking at like some random exchanges here. But basically, we're looking at like, 5 mil, 15 mil, like those kind of things, price impact. If you look at the kind of full depth of Bebop book, we have about like 12 million with about 0.5% price impact there. So, this is kind of an example of what you can achieve on chain, even if you don't necessarily think that. And that's what makers managing all these risks that we're talking about. And another example of an Aave token. So the book is actually quite lopsided here. So you can sell to makers almost 2 mil. You can buy about 0.5 mil. But again, right, we're looking at 0.5 mil, like 27 basis points, 120 basis points at almost 2 mil. This dev doesn't, even like nearly exist in the individual CeFi venue. So basically what I'm saying is that actually DeFi execution and DeFi order books are pretty good. And, they're worth using, they're worth existing. And if we're talking about, institutional capital, larger trades, capital efficiency on chain, all that kind of stuff, if we degrade the quality of market, and if we turn it into the lemon market, if we get the makers to widen, if we get makers to just like new makers to not enter, this is basically what we're losing. So what do we do? And this is my kind of a little bit like philosophical conviction, right? That equal access means both equal rights and equal responsibilities. So the kind of the ethos of DeFi of everyone should have the same access and be like super, on the same level playing field. I think it's fair if everyone behaves in the same way. But it doesn't happen this way, right? And so I think that even censorship or at least segregation based on proven behaviors actually improves the overall users' welfare and the kind of market quality as well. So I'm not talking about, asking people to KYC when they transact on chain, but it's more about kind of understanding the flow and certain heuristics to basically determine whether, to segregate basically toxic and non-toxic flow and deliver a good market to the peaches, right, while kind of managing somehow in one way or the other the lemons. So how could this be done? Well, a couple of thoughts that I'm happy to share. So one of them is filtering out the lemons, right? So how do you filter out the lemons? A couple of different ways. And some of those things we do ourselves. Some of them, I think probably the market just should be doing more of. So first of all, it's quite a lot of RFQ platforms do that. Last look mechanisms. So basically, you allow makers to reject a quote from the reject a trade with the user after they already issued a quote. That's a good mechanism. It exists in TradFi. It exists in many places in DeFi. It also affects good users. It affects good flow inadvertently, and for that reason, so I don't like it, but I don't think it's enough, and I don't think it's the best way to approach it. Another option is something we do on our end as well, is basically understanding where your source of flow comes from. and basically segregating based on that. Okay, if I know, people are talking here about the Phantom wallet, if I know that this trade is coming from Phantom wallet, I understand the types of users that they have, and I understand generally that it's not going to be toxic, right? So it's much easier for me to segregate that from something, completely random coming from, from anywhere on chain. Identify toxic flow heuristics and restrict access. So that's basically figuring out if a particular address is likely to orb based on various different ways, and like refuse, for example, to issue quotes with that, or doing something else. And also, I'm kind of thinking, I was having a breakfast meeting with one of the market makers today, and I kind of thought of like some social cooperation, basically sharing the list of baddies, because all the makers kind of do that anyway. So when they when they stop responding to quote requests, it's done because they think this has got to be a losing trade for them. So I don't think there's a lot of market maker cooperation because it's a very competitive business. But for something like this, I think it might be worth it. So yeah, this is kind of a new thought on that. So yeah, so that's kind of about like filtering out bad flow, so literally just not responding to that. But there are other kind of sort of another approach, right, and just de-incentivizing lemons. And kind of two things here. I mean, one of them is basically charging high fees. This kind of stuff doesn't happen on wallet routers, because if as a wallet you charge like 80 basis points or like 100 basis points, the ARB just doesn't exist. So that's one solution, very good. But also another one is kind of, again, a bit more philosophical or something, but I just think we should stop designing systems that fully rely on ARB to function, right? Like we basically say, oh yeah, this thing, the pricing is going to be great, like it's going to come out of just people coming in ARB, and oh yeah, like, I don't care about like, creating price mechanisms or attracting or incentivizing kind of good pricing mechanisms here, because if it's out of whack, then someone will come and orbit. And so we basically have a lot of people who come into this market and say, hey, okay, great, like all I'm going to do is like find all this like ARB opportunities, not because it creates like a better market, but because we have like just, gazillion ways of transacting, and most of them attract this kind of adverse type activity. So yeah, so basically this is kind of what I do with RFQ. We create a marketplace that's open to makers who price really competitively, who come together to create really deep liquidity at pricing that's superior to centralized exchanges. And yeah, because I want to create a good market with good quality execution there. And I think like the biggest barrier there really is the segregation of the peaches and lemons. Yeah, so that's kind of my mission right now. I think it's going to continue being like that for a while. But yeah, I think it's a worthwhile thing to do. So yeah, this is me. If you don't know or want to know more about on-chain RFQ and the toxic flow struggles or some nice stuff about it, yeah, feel free to. Thank you very much.